So let's load up the Chimeras and Tauroxes, because it seems that Mechanized Guard is back in action. For this one, let's do a focus review of the Mechanised Assault detachment from the new Codex Astra Militarum. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Imperial Guard once more, and in this video we're talking Mechanised Assault and what this new detachment can do in-game. In the recent Imperial Guard Codex there's 5 different detachments: the Combined Regiment, one for tanks, one for sort of on-foot recon, one for infantry supported by off-the-board artillery, and one for mechanized infantry in the Mechanised Assault. I feel like this one's definitely one of the key themes that you'd expect to be able to play with the Imperial Guard. It's long just been one of the way that some regiments do things as their most signature fighting style. I guess classically it's been a hallmark of the well-supplied Armageddon Steel Legion, so this one could be quite a nice one to represent them in game. Feels like any sort of stormtrooper force could benefit though, things like Cady and Kazakin, and they might have a lot more interest for the Tempestus Scions as well, now that transport seems to be the way to get them into battle as they don't deep strike. In any case, for this one, let's talk through the rules, some notable transport units, and how it might come together with some of the stronger stuff in one army list. So getting into the Mechanised Assault detachments rules, and this one's the transport for Astra Militarum transports. All the buffs basically focusing across transport vehicles and infantry units that can get in and out of them. The core rule for this one is appropriately named Armoured Fist, and it's basically a boost to infantry damage dealing when they get out of transport, giving them a +1 to the wound roll with their ranged attacks. It's fairly simple and effective, this one. It'll be pretty helpful with things like mid-strength special weapons, like say melter guns, plasma guns, and grenade launchers, and certainly doesn't hurt to have on lower strength weapons like las guns or hotshot las guns either. Compared with say born soldiers though, where you get a whole bunch of lethal hits, it is only going to be a rule that affects some of your army some of the time. It does really put the emphasis on going really quite heavy down the infantry and transports route, as if you go really quite balanced with a bunch of other tanks and infantry on the board, you might just have been better off with the Combined Regiment rule. The stratagems work quite well with this one though, with a few ways to get back in transports and potentially trigger this all over again. In general, it feels like the detachment that's probably going to be most helpful for things like, say, infantry squads with special weapons, or Kazakins and Scions. Basically the units that have quite a lot of special weapons in them feel like they'll be top priority. Getting into stratagems for the detachment, and first up we have Hasty Extraction for 1 command point. This allows an infantry unit that's just been charged to embark on a transport if they're within 3 inches of it. You technically declare this when the unit's been selected as a target for a charge, so you do it before any models have been moved or anything. I maybe wasn't too surprised to see this one here. It basically defends your units against melee somewhat. A lot of the time what's going to happen is a transport moves up, you jump out the unit, and you use the detachment rule, hopefully deal some nasty damage to whatever was in your sights, and the enemy is likely to hit you back hard, either with shooting or with trying to charge you, and if you can get the unit back into the transport, then hopefully they might have a longer charge to hit that transport, and even if they get there they might not necessarily destroy it. Even if they do, the squad will be able to disembark out the back and basically have saved itself for 1 more turn worth of special weapon fire. This one's really quite an easy one to use quite a lot against a melee heavy army. For 1 command point, there's Move Out. At the end of your opponent's turn, this is another embark in a transport one. If you happen to have one of your infantry units that has a transport that they can embark into within 3 inches, they can get into it, provided they're not within engagement range of the enemy or anything. Again, like the other one, this one could be another way to get back into the transport and get that +1 to wound again when you get out with special weapons. I feel like this is one that you could consider, say, if you've had your unit get out, deal its damage and slay its target, and then in the enemy turn they've had to direct all their damage towards other things and the squad's still fairly intact. That could then be really powerful to have them jump back in the transport and then have that transport move really fast and drop them somewhere else. You would have to save a command point till the end of the turn though, so that would have some trade-offs versus things like Smoke or Overwatch or things. Before we move on to the other stratagems and enhancements, I'll just give a quick shout out to today's video sponsor in Warhaus. They're an Australian-based gaming store recently opening near Brisbane, who asked to sponsor a few videos to get the word out that they exist, and they have a good discount on Games Workshop models, going for a rather ambitious discount of 23% off Games Workshop's prices. Their web store's not long been online, and they say they've got some big ambitions to expand, and can do the normal things that you'd expect out of an online discount retailer. They have a flat $10 Australian shipping rate below $150 and free over that. If there's something that doesn't appear on their web store but Games Workshop stock it, then you can ask them to order it in, and their gaming store is shortly to open on 599 Oxley Road in Corinda outside Brisbane. As part of attracting some eyes to their social media and opening, they also have a Deathcore launch box giveaway too. Entries to that close on the 15th of January, but basically it's liking the post and following their Instagram down in the video description if you want to enter for that. In any case, feel free to check them out, there'll be links down in the video description, and a massive thank you to them for sponsoring this video. Onto the other mechanised stratagems though, and for one command point we've got Swift Interception. This one's a reactive move one for a transport, and it triggers when an enemy unit makes a normal fallback or advanced move that ends within 9 inches of one. I feel like reactive moves are usually quite powerful, and I'm just a little bit suspect as to whether or not transports are really going to be the most powerful thing to do it on. I know in this detachment they're going to have a lot more power. I guess it's probably going to have most impact when you've got a transport that's say moved up and tried to get to safety with some cargo inside it that you want to protect, and then maybe the enemy moves up to try and threaten it, and then you can move away to back away from a charge or hide behind terrain. It does feel like it might be used, and definitely could be one to try and prevent a bunch of damage and keep the opponent out of position. I feel like there's times when it'll just opportunistically come up in this detachment. For 1 CP, there's Clear and Secure. A unit that disembarks from a transport can reroll hit and wound rolls against enemy units on an objective marker when they're shooting. Flat rerolls hits and wounds is just kind of monstrous as a damage buff, even when applied to more basic infantry. This one seems kind of massive when it's applied to, say, Kazakin combined with a detachment rule. You'd be getting out, hitting on a 3+, maybe even a 2+ with an order, and then wounding literally everything in the game most of the time, given that you'd be wounding on a 5+, and re-rolling every single thing that doesn't wound if you shoot something on an objective. It feels like it might make the opponent really think carefully about what sort of things they put on objectives to eat that amount of damage, though if they fail to hold on to a point because of that, that could have value all in itself. Next up, for one command point, we've got Vox Relay. You use this one in your command phase when you've got an infantry officer inside a transport, and that infantry officer is allowed to issue orders even though it's not on the battlefield, and can do so at unlimited range if it targets transports. The wording maybe feels a little bit unclear for me. I'm not sure if they're trying to imply that you should be able to measure regular order distance from the transport itself for ordering other stuff, and then just other transports basically get to have their orders broadcasted over the radio. Though from what they've written it sounds like this could only be used to order transports. I guess maybe if you had Ursula Creed embarks, then you could issue 3 different orders to transports all over the board. Though having to spend 1 command point to do so maybe feels a little bit on the mediocre side. Maybe it could be handy if you do have a lot of them really quite widely strong though. Having an extra move for extra threat range could be good. Finally, for 1 CP, we've got Rapid Dispersal. You use this on an infantry unit that disembarks from a transport, and it can make a normal move of d6 inches in the movement phase. I guess the idea of this one is to be able to move an extra d6 inches, so you'd either get the disembark distance d6 inches and its normal move if the transport hadn't moved yet, or if the transport had, I guess you just get the disembark distance and the extra d6 inches if that made a difference. I guess if you're trying to maximally stretch the squad towards an objective or get an absolutely key line of sight or something, it could be all the difference. And if you just want to go for maximal disruption as well, you could even charge with the same unit, potentially gumming up the enemy and stopping them from being able to move freely. Feels like it could be a little bit more on the situational side, but definitely means that you could be striking really far out of a transport with special weapons and get them into 12-inch range. Finally, for enhancements for the detachment, for 15 points we've got Bold Leadership. This one's a sticky objectives type rule for the bearer's unit or the transport that they're embarked in. If you can control an objective marker at the end of the command phase with the bearer or their transport, then it becomes yours for the rest of the game until the opponent can take it back and have more objective control than you at the start or end of any turn. I think for 15 points this one's really quite a nice one. You could potentially have it on a transport that rumbles up behind terrain and parks on an objective and just be an annoying thing to remove. If the opponent pops it, then you might get a squad out to be able to stay on the objective anyway and have far more OC there, and if they don't, then you can potentially go on to strike out and deal damage next turn. Next up for 10 points, the Sacred Unguents. You use this on a Tech Priest engine seer, and it gets to nominate a non-Titanic, non-aircraft transport, and that unit gets 2 reroll hits in the shooting phase. It's really quite a powerful buff, though transport firepower doesn't tend to be the most exciting in the world. I feel like between this, the 4+ invulnerable save and the healing though, it could maybe tip the balance as to whether or not it's worth it to include a Tech Priest in the detachment. I feel like that'd be powerful enough to make it at least interesting on a Chimera with some heavy bolters or a Taurox Prime potentially. I guess the main issue might be keeping up with the transport, though if it started towards the front of the transport and then the Tech Priest advances, you'd hopefully be able to keep it in range for the shooting boost. Next up, for 20 points, we've got Smoke Grenades. This one's for an infantry officer only, and the bearer's unit gets stealth and cover while they're wholly within 3 inches of a transport vehicle. That one's a nice enough defensive boost for when you've just got out of your transport, I suppose. Given that it's guard infantry, even the ones with a 4+ save aren't exactly going to be super durable with that still, but hopefully there should be more effort to take down and more should survive. It won't do anything if the opponent's planning to charge you, but I guess if you do that, hopefully you've got the option to be able to re-embark back in the transport vehicle. Seems okay for a fairly high value squad. Finally, for 25 points, there's Vanguard Honours. This one allows an infantry officer's unit to disembark from a transport after it advanced, which I think isn't awful, but maybe a bit of an ask for 25 points. You could just take a Taurox and have that ability anyway, and for both spending 25 points and also giving up the transport shooting attacks, it maybe just feels a little bit on the medium side. Then for the units to apply all those things to, let's take a quick look through the Astra Militarum transports. In the Codex, the Chimera remains as trusty as ever, no real changes here. They went up in points kind of recently to 85 points, but I still think that they're usable enough despite that. They do pack perhaps a surprising amount of firepower for a cheapish transport, lots of volume fire from the las guns and likely a couple of heavy flamers, plus can be used to issue some orders out of them. At 65 points though, if all you need is a hold to deliver that +1 to wound rule, then the Taurox can do that. It doesn't have as much toughness or quite as much firepower as the Chimera, but it does move a little bit faster, and you can also advance and drop with this one. I feel like it might be a bit more tempting as a result. Otherwise, for the Tempestus Scions, we've got the Taurox Prime. This one's 90 points and did have a few Codex changes. They flipped the buff that it gives from reroll wound rolls to full reroll hit rolls for targeting the same thing as it for the unit that disembarks. So this is one that could very easily just give you massive damage buffs, even if you don't trigger the detachment stratagems, with 4 rerolls to hit from this thing and the +1 to wound. Tempestus Scions with plasma and melter guns are going to be hitting pretty hard against most things in general. The weapon profiles did have a few tweaks as well. The Gatling cannon lost 4 shots but gained twin-linked and devastating wounds. I think overall that's an upgrade. The missile launcher did get toned down a little bit though. It's just the 1 twin-linked shot though, as opposed to 2 shots. Otherwise, I guess you could use the more exotic transports like the Valkyrie. In general, Games Workshop's been pricing this one just too high to really consider versus the other on-the-ground transports recently though. You could get a massive great big swoop in of 20 inches and then drop a unit out of it, but the main issue is that it has to transport something that usually costs far less than it. Otherwise, I guess if you wanted to try and make one of the big transport super heavies work, this could be one of the detachments to do so. Maybe something like the great big Doom Hammer, a Baneblade chassis variant with the enormous melter weapon, hopefully able to demolish 1 enemy unit per turn, and then you could have a couple of squads hiding in to jump out of it. You could even go with something like a 10-man Scion squad with 4 command squad attached, or a 20-strong platoon squad with an attached command squad too, and jump out for the +1 to wound buff, and then be really quite an efficient target for jumping back in with one of the strats. In general though, it feels like the units that get the most benefit out of this would be the ones that can take 4 special weapons per 10 of them, like the Kazakin and the Scions. The Kazakin could take 2 plasmas and 2 melters in the unit, plus the hotshot lasgun and a bunch of other hotshots. They also get their melter mine, which might be able to get close as well. They can scout their transport into the midboard for hopefully some nice easy alpha strikes. The only sort of anti-synergy that they have with transports is not being able to use their warrior elite special rule while they're embarked, so I guess you will be giving up that boosted order for getting the +1 to wound when they jump out, and also being a particularly great target for the reroll 1s to hit and wound stratagem. I feel like with that on the go you might not even need an attached character. Otherwise, Tempestus Scions do feel like they'll be able to bring the damage really quite hard, and more so in this detachment with the +1 to wound when jumping out of a Taurox Prime. That one can give them 4 hit rerolls, they can get 4 rerolls to wound against things on objectives, but even if they aren't targeting things on objectives between a +1 to wound and their inbuilt reroll wound rolls of 1, they're still going to be hitting really hard with those special weapons, and you could certainly take a squad of 5 of these and then take an attached command squad, so you'd have 10 models in the transport, and the command squad could have 4 different special weapons if you'd like. Overall, for the main things that the detachment adds and makes the army stronger with, it really does seem to do at least a fairly good job of making special weapons genuinely dangerous when jumping out of your favourite metal boxes. The core rule's nice for this, with the +1 to wound, and the 4 reroll to hit and wound stratagem is absolutely brutal, particularly with something like Kazakin when pointed against an enemy objective. I think the sticky objective enhancement's really quite a nice standout one as well. Feels like an easy pickup for 15 points on a unit that you might play just a tiny bit more conservatively with. I feel like the idea would be to roll up a whole bunch of transports, have things ready to jump out and deal some big damage. The opponent is likely to strike back, but hopefully might be able to cause some disruption with things like reactive moves or the re-embark stratagems, and then hopefully pick up the pieces and be ready to go again the next turn. A lot of the movement stuff maybe feels like more the kind of thing that you'd think about situations to use them and see how well the opponent manages to actually deal damage to your units and things, as opposed to being able to 100% plan whether or not they're going to be worth it at the start of the enemy turn. I feel like you would have to go quite down the route of infantry and transports to make this worth it over the combined arms regiment. If you've got a real mix of things, then probably the lethal hits on everything against certain targets might well outweigh that. And I guess if you're going very heavy on the scions and transports, maybe Bridgehead Strike might be an interesting one for that. But that detachment certainly got a whole load worse with the scions losing Deep Strike. In any case, here's a rough sort of initial impressions kind of army list, mainly focusing around 5 blocks of stormtroopers and transports pretty much. 3 of them with Militarum Tempestus command squads taking maximum special weapons attached to 5-man scion squads, and they'll all be jumping out of the Taurox primes, or with 4 rerolls to hit and wounds if they can target things on objectives, but certainly a +1 to wound as well, just from the detachment rule as it is. They'll also be able to get an order from the command squad as well. I gave one of the Scion command squads the stealth and cover enhancement for a little bit more survivability for one of them. Then to back that up, there's a couple of Kazakin units. They're loaded up with Plasma and Melter and jumping in a couple of bare-bones Tauroxes. Maybe a bit cheap and cheerful versus Chimeras without as much good stuff, but they can move really quite fast and could maybe a bit more happily just advance and drop. One of them will be led by Cadian Castellan, and that will give them sustained hits for yet more lethalness, the ability to fall back and shoot if they do get tagged, and also could potentially order multiple units if it made sense to. If it made sense, you could also use him to order multiple transports elsewhere on the map while he's embarked. I gave him the sticky objectives enhancement as well. Then there's a Tech Priest engines here with the enhancement that will try and follow around a Taurox Prime. Might be a bit too much of a luxury, but it gives it a 4+ invulnerable save, and 4 rerolls to hit for the Gatling cannon, which is something at least. And then beyond that, there's a unit of Cadian shock troops to sticky objective and just put a bit of presence on the home field objective. 3 units of 5 combat engineers, because I'm putting those in every list until Games Workshop confirm that they're not going to be 35 points. 2 of the squads here can ride in the Taurox to get them to deliver those mortal wounds a bit more efficiently, the other one just foot slog. I decided to throw a random cheap unit of Ogrins in another Taurox, just as a really cheap unit to put some muscle on a mid-board objective, at least take a little bit of focus fire to bring them down, though they're mainly going to aim to be expendable. And then to support all the special weapon fire, we've got access to reroll ones to hit from a couple of Scout Sentinels, an extra pip of AP on the unit that most needs it from a Lehman Russ Exterminator, and a Hellhounds to strip cover, hopefully all aiming to soup up those Melter Plasma and hot shots against the things that most need to die. Finally, I've also thrown in Gaunt's Ghosts again for a nice return to reserve units to bounce around doing secondaries. It's almost certainly a long way from optimal, but definitely has a whole bunch of big damage punches that use the core detachment rules. Those Scions can be re-rolling everything against the units that they jump out against if they fire against objectives, and a Kazakin might be able to as well with the Stratagem. In any case, look forward to hearing what you think about the Mechanised Assault detachment. Do you think that this is one that you might try out and put on the table yourself? Look forward to hearing your thoughts down in the comments. As mentioned, feel free to check out Warhaus, today's video sponsor, down in the video description if you live down under. They do have a rather good discount versus Games Workshop's prices, so it might be worth checking out as a new store on the scene. Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more like this. I'll hopefully be aiming to follow up with this with a full Guard Codex review as the next video on the channel, so stick around if you'd like to see that. But just in general, I'll be aiming to post 40k videos just about every day. I'll most certainly keep them coming. If you'd like to support the channel and the videos I make, then check out the Patreon page linked down in the video description. There's a few rewards such as seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next, and automatic entry into the monthly prize giveaways. If any of that's of interest, then it's linked below. Otherwise though, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.